As the arch-enemy of DC's most heroic figure, Lex Luthor has done a whole lot of awful things in his time in comics. He's lied, cheated, killed, and stolen 40 cakes, which is as many as 40 tens, and that's terrible. But he's also a character who often appears to be trying to do some kind of good, even if it is a totally warped form of good because he has basically no moral code. While he's often typecast into being a stereotypical villain, Luthor is fundamentally more than that. But storylines that highlight how morally grey he is can easily become complicated, as they involve doing one very weird thing, making Superman look not so super. Because though Supes is always trying his best to do the right thing, he does sort of seem to have a blind spot when it comes to understanding his bald-headed rival. Since Lex has been evil for so long, and has pretended to turn good so many times, the Man of Steel has a complete sense of distrust for the supervillain, which leads to him beating Luthor up when the former Ginger is just trying to help out. Much like I meant well 2 weeks ago when I called out May, Peter Parker's grandmother, by accident, and ruined many of our viewers' lives, I'm sure the Man of Steel meant well in each of the 10 times Superman ruined Lex Luthor's life. Number 10, making him go into hiding. Now, unlike many other instances of Superman ruining Lex Luthor's life, it has to be said that the time the Kryptonian made its bald enemy go into hiding is a case where Luthor was entirely in the wrong. During the strange time in DC where Luthor was the President of the United States, Batman and Superman discover that, perhaps unsurprisingly, Lex has been doing all sorts of questionably legal stuff during his time in office. Wanting to put a stop to this, especially the part where Luthor declares the duo criminals, the pair confront the follically challenged villain, whereupon he gives his classic villain monologue, which is precisely where he goes wrong, as said monologue is being recorded and broadcast worldwide, forcing Lex to hide away until people stop being so furious at him, which also means that his presidential title is revoked. Admittedly though, it's also revealed in this comic that Lex has been dosing himself with a mix of venom and kryptonite, which means that he's completely out of it basically the entire time we see him in the comic. While this doesn't excuse his actions in the story, it does explain why he's so much more evil than usual in it. Number 9, letting him leave the Justice League. It goes pretty much without saying that Superman wasn't exactly stoked when Lex Luthor joined the Justice League. In fact, the two spent most of their time still at odds, despite the fact that they were finally working for the same team. But also, Luthor's time in DC's biggest hero team did appear to be helping him learn a proper moral code. Even though the pair didn't get on, it seemed clear to Superman that, despite his past, the megalomaniac was legitimately trying to be a better person. And so, as weird as this might sound, it's entirely frustrating to see the Man of Steel basically give zero care to Lex leaving the team. While it's likely this is because the billionaire is besties with Martian Manhunter, who also couldn't convince him to stay, Superman's antagonistic relationship with Luthor is exactly what makes his opinion so important, because Lex leaves as he's convinced he's destined to be a villain, so the only person who could convince him otherwise is likely the man who hates him most. Were Supes to have reassured him, there's a pretty good chance Metropolis's richest man would have stuck with the side of good, but that would have involved Superman getting to punch him significantly less, so you can maybe understand why he didn't. Number 8. Killing his love interest. While Luthor infamously was romantically interested in both Superman's partner, Lois Lane, and his sister, Supergirl, neither of these individuals would see themselves murdered by the Man of Steel. Instead, the blessing of a Kryptonian killing goes to Hope, a woman who Luthor appears to have saved from an unspecified life-threatening injury by having scientists replace the majority of her body with robotic parts. This succeeds, leaving Hope to go on to be Metropolis's other major superhero. That is, until Hope drops a supervillain from the top of a building when Lex commands her to, which is apparently a huge crime in the eyes of the Man of Steel, despite the fact he works with superheroes like Wonder Woman, who are also totally content to murder people who have committed horrific crimes. The two heroes then fight, with Supes naturally outmatching the newer hero. Seeing this, Lex decides to activate a secret protocol in her, which makes her explode. This is down to Luthor, of course, but you'd think Superman would know better than to try and go toe-to-toe with another superhero, especially one associated with the tricky Luthor. Instead, Hope's death gives them something else to clash over, as if they didn't have enough in the first place. Number 7. Getting him arrested. To start things off, it's worth addressing the obvious. People who do crimes generally should go to prison. Given Lex Luthor is a villain who often does terrible, terrible crimes, it makes sense that Superman's response is generally to try and get him sent to jail, where people who do very bad crimes should be. However, it's also worth remembering that Luthor is a billionaire genius who was once president. He's never going to stay in prison long, as he always escapes through either legal or illegal means. As such, it seems that the only purpose of getting Luthor locked away is to aggravate him, and to take away some of his material possessions. This is a terrible idea though, as Luthor is at his absolute most dangerous when he feels like he needs to gain things, be it money or power. So not only is Superman ruining Luthor's life, he's doing so in a way where, if we're really honest for a moment, nothing's gained from it, and in fact Lex is probably all the more evil afterwards. But one more time, it's understandable that Superman sends him to jail. It's just a shame that it's never one that can, actually detain him for more than a long weekend. Number 6. Making him sell his soul. The matter of Lex Luthor selling his soul is a profoundly complicated one. After Lois Lane and Superman discovered that Lex had cloned himself and then had his brain transferred into this body in order to pretend to be his own son, more than a few suspicions were raised as to what the man's endgame was. As it turns out, said endgame was to try and date Supergirl and to try and ruin Lois's life after discovering that she had uncovered his dark secret. As it turned out, this wasn't the only dark secret about Luthor at the time, as it would also be revealed that his clone body was rapidly deteriorating. Forced into a corner by Superman revealing who he was to the public, Luthor sought the only out he could, and sold his soul to the demon Neron in order to be restored into a healthy body. Which you have to kind of hope Superman never found out about, so he never has to think about being technically responsible for this transaction. Ignorance truly is bliss for this one. Number 5. Letting his memory be wiped. In a sense, Action Comics 796 is a defining point in Luthor's life, in the pre-reboot DC timeline, as it involves the villain being punished for the one good deed he ever did for Superman, ensuring that it would likely never happen again. Because after discovering that the Man of Steel is in fact Clark Kent, Luthor goes against his instinct to be the worst guy ever, and decides to keep this information to himself. Sure, he isn't exactly nice about it, and he implies that part of the reason he doesn't reveal Kent's identity is because he still fancies Lois, but the fact is, he's presented with the option to ruin Superman's life for once and for all, and he refuses to take it. As a reward for this, a villain named Manchester Black deletes all of Luthor's files on Superman and wipes his memory, so he has no way of rediscovering who the hero is. And where is Superman while his newest ally is having his memory eroded? Well, he's in bed with Lois for 3 whole days. We know where the Man of Steel's priorities lie, at least. Number 4. Trying to stop him being a superhero. The setup for Action Comics 957 is a particularly unusual one, even for DC standards, because it's set after this universe's Superman has died, with him being replaced by a different Supes for an alternate universe. Aware that his Superman has died, and unaware of his replacement, Lex Luthor attempts to take the title of the Man of Steel, because who better to take on said role than the most hated rival of Clark Kent? Now, while it's entirely uncool that Lex has started dressing in the costume of his dead arch-enemy, it's also not a gesture that warrants him being called a murderer and an agent of destruction, as at this time, Luthor is legitimately trying to reform. Lex doesn't even try to fight the new Superman, which you'd think would clue him in that this particular version of the man is decidedly less villainous. Instead, America's Golden Boy messes with Luthor's suit until he activates its defense mechanisms, and then decides to punch the former villain in the face for this, leading to the pair getting in a fight that is decidedly Superman's fault. Number 3, blaming him for the release of the Amazo virus. Some time after the Justice League allowed Lex Luthor into its fold, a mysterious virus began to infect the citizens of the world. When told this, Luthor appeared deeply suspicious before revealing an almost obvious truth. He was the one who created the disease in the first place. After beating him up a little, Lex explains. As it turns out, the Amazo virus was designed to only affect Kryptonians, which is why Luthor was horrified to see it affecting regular humans. Not wanting to be responsible for a modern-age Black Plague, the reformed villain begins to work on a cure, while continually berated by Superman all the way. Though it's entirely fair that Supes is mad about the whole thing, it has to be remembered that Lex made this virus years before he reformed, and so it doesn't reflect on his current moral standing. Thus, although it's messed up Luthor made a personalized poison to take out the Man of Steel, it's also worth remembering that Superman agreed to put all the times the pair had fought aside when Luthor joined the Justice League. And so, it seems entirely redundant to decide he's still a supervillain for a plot he made at the height of his own personal depravity. Number 2, killing him. As Superman's biggest rival, Luthor exists as a sort of litmus test for the Man of Steel. In storylines where Supes starts to become unhinged, or just straight up evil, Lex's bald head is usually first on the chopping block, with his death marking the start of the hero's quick descent down a slippery slope of wrongdoing. The most famous of these is, of course, in Injustice, where a tyrannical Superman breaks Lex's neck after the two finally get in a fight. While this is definitely the most brutal death, it's not the only time that DC's Golden Boy has decided to just go hog wild on his nemesis. Of these various mutations, the most interesting is actually one of the most recent, in the 2019 Lex Luthor Year of the Villain comic. When the fully evil Apex Lex explores the multiverse to see his doppelgangers, he discovers a version of him who is currently in critical condition after a fight with the Man of Steel. As it turns out, Lex had used a biological weapon called the Black Mercy on Supes, who had then hallucinated an entire life on Krypton due to the plant's effect. Displeased at discovering his entire life as he knew it was a lie, Superman brutalized Luthor, giving him such severe wounds that he'd end up ultimately dying to them. In this circumstance, however, Luthor would at least die with a suitably smug smile on his face. Number 1. Making him lose his hair. For a long time, Lex Luthor had perhaps one of the funniest reasons in comic history as to why he despised the Man of Steel. While the current reason for the pair's rivalry is down to Lex's complete paranoia surrounding a man who can accomplish godlike feats, his Silver Age counterpart was given a significantly less convincing motivation. In Adventure Comics 271, Luthor is trapped in a house fire and shouts Superman for help. Naturally, the hero comes to help his friend in need, using his breath powers to put out the flames. This works, but also has one unexpected side effect. It makes Lex go completely and permanently bald. The soon-to-be supervillain goes absolutely ballistic at this, deciding then and there that he'll kill Superman at any cost for ruining his carefully coiffed locks. The kicker to all this is that Lex actually really suits being bald, meaning that he's not even mad that Superman made him look silly. He's just mad that Superman had to save him. And that's our list. Can you think of worse things Supes has done to his sometimes rival, sometimes ally? Let us know down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Zero from What Culture, and if you're still here about that Spider-Man thing, I am sorry, and I do hope you at least got a laugh out of it. But regardless of if you did, have a great day.